Hello, everyone. My name's Perry Scholes. I am the founding member and chairperson for Kraft Foods Alumni Network. Kraft Foods Alumni Network started in 2007 and has been an evolution for a number of years from just very casual meetings with Kraft Foods alums to where it's evolved up to last year being an event where we have social events as well as leadership development and talent, also as well as consultant focus. So one of the things that we got feedback on was the opportunity that many of our alums from Kraft Foods have moved on to other CPG opportunities, and also many of our consultants who were Kraft Foods alums who started consulting business, they actually consult and work in a number of other CPG organizations. And so one of the things that we had to take stock in was what we're doing for Kraft Foods alumni, we can continue to do the same things there, but do it in a broader context. And so the beginning of this year, we've started our evolution to become CPG Professional Networks. And CPG Professional Networks does not discontinue being Kraft Foods alumni. It's just an extension and a reach out to the rest of the alumni community. So for years, we focused on 4 key areas within our Kraft Foods Alumni Network, and going forward, we will now do that for the broader CPG industry. Those are network, talent, focus on consultants, as well as professional development. So what does that mean? So networking, we're really looking to develop a membership-driven community where we share information, blogs, we have chapters, and we celebrate the history of the various CPG organizations. This network, what we think is different from LinkedIn or any other network, is the fact that we come together and that it is an active community of members who are engaged and being a part of the community and really helping each other out. That's the big difference between CPG Professional Networks, formerly Kraft Foods alumni, and any other network that might be in an online community. I can tell you personally that I've met and worked with a number of people as a part of the alumni network, people that I never met when I worked and was employed at Kraft Foods or Nabisco or any of the other CPGs I was associated with. And so it's an opportunity for us, and a good testament to that is the fact that Lori, speaker today, and I never met in a Kraft work environment, but we did in fact meet as a part of the network. The next thing is around talent. So one of the things that we took a lot of pride in Kraft and Nabisco, and it's consistent in a number of CPG organizations, is talent, the people that you work with, the quality of the people that you work with. And so CPG Professional Networks continues to have a focus on being a source for talent, companies looking for talent and maybe want to post jobs, there's an opportunity to do that, as well as individuals going through job transition, that there are resources for individuals to post a resume and get information here within the network, and really just making contact with our members who are in a variety of different either consulting companies and or CPG organizations. And so the other thing about talent, and I'll talk about this when we get to consultants, but we do have a cadre of talented individuals who were well-educated in CPG organizations that are now out doing their own work, and they're also a source of talent for organizations. Development, and this is an area where we take a lot of pride in continuing the evolution of the lifelong learning that exists in a typical CPG company, and that we are putting together executive panels for members to come in and really share their experience about what they learned in their CPG environment and how they're applying that today in the things that they do. Webinar series is an example of that is today and what we're doing. We're also working to evolve discussion groups and mentoring and partnerships. And a lot of those mentoring and partnerships really begin by people showing up at our events, participating, meeting someone that's like-minded or someone that you're very interested in getting to know, and that partnership just starts organically. And then consultants. So we talk about this opportunity where we have a number of talented people that are in their own business. They are out helping CPG companies and companies in a variety of different industries with growing their business and moving things strategically or tactically along in those organizations across many, many functions, from strategy work to, as we're going to hear from today from Lori, from a sensory and science standpoint, myself as an HR consultant, and just a myriad of different consultants that exist, all from a really solid, educated background from CPG organizations. And so this community exists to really help each other as well as be a service throughout the industry. So those are the 4 things that we focus on, and we hope that you will consider joining the network if you're not a member and being a part of this evolution that we're on. So now we're going to switch from me talking about CPG networks to Lori. Lori Rothman is a person that I said I have met through networking events in the past, and she and I collaborated on some of the expertise that she has from a standpoint of sensory and consumer science. And today what we're doing is really 2 of the 4 things that are on our board. 3 of the things that are on the board. 1, Lori's a consultant who's actively out growing her business and working in consumer environment. 2, from a talent perspective, really showcasing Lori's expertise. And then the 3rd part, which is you guys that are out in the audience today, getting insights and learning from Lori. So it's a part of that 3rd bucket where we really are on a mission to continue lifelong learning and sharing ideas and concepts. So Lori, are you able to get your screen all set up?
I think I have it up, Perry. Do you not see it?
I do see it. I think it may need to just go in presentation mode, or is it?
I think I have it in presentation mode. It's on presentation mode in my screen.
Okay, so I can see it fully now on my screen. So okay. Without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Lori Rothman. Thank you.
So good morning, afternoon, evening. We have several time zones represented on the call. First off, I want to thank Perry for arranging the webinar and for getting it communicated and deployed. And I hope you will consider joining the CPG network that Perry just mentioned. So I'm going to talk to you today about how to get the biggest impact from your sensory consumer science team. I refer to the function as sensory consumer science, and I do that to emphasize that the world of sensory includes both technical tools as well as consumer tools. But today I might just refer to it as sensory as a shortcut. So, oops, I'm having trouble. All right. Oh, there we go. All right. So today, my goal for today is to get you to think about your in-house sensory consumer science team, how to increase its impact and influence. And if your organization doesn't have a sensory consumer science function, I'm going to briefly discuss how you can leverage some of the techniques that sensory and consumer scientists use on your own or with minimal help. And while my focus is targeted towards CPG companies, I'm going to also discuss how the function that resides in ingredient companies or flavor suppliers can maximize its impact. So the goals are, I want you to think about, is your sensory consumer science team maximizing its potential to decrease risk and contribute to business growth? What does your sensory science team need to maximize its potential? And how can you leverage sensory science tools to decrease risk if your organization doesn't have this function? So who am I and why should you care about what I have to say? Most of you know me. As far as credentials, I have a master's in food science from Davis. I worked with Rosemary Pangborn and Michael Amani for my thesis. I have a degree in nutrition. I'm a certified food scientist, and I have 30 years, more than 30 years experience developing sensory teams and tools in various food companies. And Philip Morris is there because I worked on 7-Up when I was there. I've had a variety of technical and managerial roles with responsibilities both domestic and international. And I've created and staffed sensory teams and built sensory facilities. So let's just talk about what the purpose of a sensory consumer science function is, right? It's to reduce risk in business decisions and to build product and category knowledge. So I always tell people that I'm in the risk reduction business. How a sensory consumer scientist reduces risk is when they apply the appropriate research plan and tools to a given situation. And they use statistical tools and also non-statistical judgment, right? Based on their knowledge of the categories and products under study and of the consumers that purchase and use those categories and products. So in a broad sense, there's really 4 types of projects that we sensory and consumer scientists work on. So there's monitoring projects, right, where you ensure that you're manufacturing what you desire to sell. There's reformulation projects where you change recipes as you need to maintain efficiencies. There's renovation projects, which help you improve products and win in the market. And then there's innovation, where you create products that exceed consumers' expectations. And in the course of these projects, you can gain both product knowledge and develop hypotheses about your products, your competitors' products, and the category. And then you can test those hypotheses with additional research. So let's look at some of the specific questions that sensory and consumer scientists can help you answer for each of these project types. So we've got monitoring projects. So it used to be that one of the hallmarks of a good product was that there was very little variation, both within and across packaging, right? Variation was a sensory cue. The process wasn't in control. But now many consumers want to see some sensory variation in products. And that's a cue for handmade or homemade, even when it's clearly a processed food. So your job is to find the sweet spot. Now, what the company thinks of as a defect may not be a defect in their consumer's eyes. So let's talk about, for example, chocolate-covered peanuts. When I worked for Brock's Candy, and some of you may have heard this story before, if so, I apologize. Brock's had a specification in chocolate-covered peanuts of no more than 10% doubles. What's doubles? Doubles are 2 peanuts connected with a chocolate bridge. I personally like the doubles. You know, they gave my tongue some play area. There was the chocolate melting. And I thought that 10% was being pretty strict. 10% meant that there was a lot of rework, whereas the chocolate had to be melted back and retempered, and then the nuts had to be used again. So I did a study to find out what % of doubles was actually objective to consumers. And the answer was that the low amount of doubles was objective. Consumers just love the doubles. So because they were chocolate peanuts and not chocolate doubles, the company didn't go to 100%. But of course, they could raise the specification and save a lot of time and effort in the rework, and also delight consumers a bit more. So reformulation projects are the ones where generally the goal is to maintain the product's sensory properties in the face of changes in recipe or suppliers. So after completing a few of these projects, you might be able to predict the sensitivity of your consumers to future potential changes and to postulate their reactions. Now, renovation projects are where you're overhauling the product's sensory profile. Maybe you're trying to improve the product even on its own or compared to a competitor. You could be changing the nutritional profile or maybe the ingredient line, or maybe building a new sensory or functional properties into the product to differentiate it from competition, maybe even to make a claim. And these projects result in a wealth of product and category knowledge being uncovered. In innovation projects, they're where you learn where the white space is and how to develop in this space. So as I mentioned, one of the jobs of the sensory scientist is to reduce risk. So you do this by conducting products systematically, scientifically, so that you can use statistical tools to measure uncertainty. And you also reduce risk by having direct interaction with consumers throughout the usage cycle to see how your product is used, how it fits with consumers' lives, and where any emotions are evoked. So I'm going to talk to you now about we've talked about what sensory does, sensory consumer science. Let's talk about what your team needs to be successful. And I'm going to go into each of these in more detail in a minute. So you need a mission and vision statements. I know that many of you don't have them, or you have not updated them in several years. You need yearly goals, and the goals need to relate to the business, the sensory function, and each individual and the staff personally. You need to have the right budget. I'm going to talk a lot about that, and it needs to be transparent to the organization. You need to have the right staffing, number of talent. Staffing also includes a very, very strong leader. You need the right facility or access to such. You need the right training, internal and external. I'll talk about that more in a minute. And you need the right relationships, cross-functional relationships. So, what do I mean by mission and vision? So these are the statements that cascade from the organization, define the role of the function, which are visible to all. An example, mission, we help create products that consumers love. We ensure consumer-centric product design. Sometimes it's difficult to put into words, but it's very important to put your function's purpose into words, because once you've got it, the vision and mission are like guiding lights throughout the development and testing process. So you might have vision, mission, strategies, priorities, values. It might look something like this. However it looks like, it's really important to make sure that your vision and mission are up to date and that you are being true to it. You need annual goals. There's 3 types of goals, as I mentioned. There's links to business goals. Our main purpose is to help the business. So 2 business goals, as an example for an annual goal of the function, could be to uncover drivers of liking for the X category. Another could be to develop research plans for cost-reducing product Y. You also need goals that improve the function, right? You have to get better as a function. For example, your goals could be to upgrade the panel testing software or supplier training on emotional profiling, as an example. And I will talk a little bit more about leveraging suppliers later, but suppliers you can form great partnerships with them, and they will help you in training your team. Then you also need goals that improve the individual. Jane might be taking an online statistics class, and Joe might have the goal to attend a certain conference and report out. You need an annual budget. It's really important that sensory and consumer science function be allocated and manage its own budget, rather than have projects funded in dribs and drabs throughout the year. When the sensory team has its own budget, it can prioritize research across projects in line with the organizational goals and across business units, rather than have to respond only to the latest crisis. So as the business situation changes throughout the year and the business priorities change, the budget's going to change. Sometimes more resources are requested for new projects. Sometimes there's a desire for a give back of resources. We've all been there. And sometimes the budget remains the same but is deployed differently because projects are prioritized or deprioritized. And it's critical that the sensory scientist has the appropriate communication so that they can respond quickly as these priorities change. The budget and projects funded and not funded should be transparent so that all can see where the dollars are being allocated. If dollars open up, projects on the not funded list can be moved up. Dollars can be allocated for crisis testing or surprise projects that we know always come down the pike. The budget process will never be perfect, and it can be difficult to manage. But if you're transparent and communicate, it can go a long way toward making sure that the appropriate projects are adequately funded. So again, you need the right budget that lets you complete the needed research. This should be owned by the function, but it should still be transparent so that all functions can see it and potentially impact the organization. It should be in line with what's needed to complete the annual goals and with other CPG or ingredient companies of similar size. It should be reviewed and revised regularly. And it should be allocated for project and product importance to the organization strategy and the bottom line. A rule of thumb for the budget is to allocate, and this is going to vary widely between companies, but for every $1 billion in company or business unit revenue, you should have 1 to 2 million in research for consumer testing. All right, we're going to talk about staffing. So the right staff is really important to the health of the sensory consumer science function. And as your company reaches 100 million in sales, you should have at least one professional with academic training in sensory to help keep innovation and reformulations on track as the company grows, but also to make sure that QC measures include sensory properties. The professionals shouldn't be running around the hall with a cart, tracking people down in the hallway. And as the company grows and projects become more varied, the staff and budget should grow as well. Strong leader is also a must. So you've got to have the right number of people, and they need to be commensurate with the revenue and scope of the research. And the talent that you have should be aligned with organizational needs. And again, I can't say it enough. You really need a strong leader. I've been in companies where the staff is great, but the lack of leadership means that the sensory function is not really leveraged properly and they're not giving maximum impact. So your organization may or may not need its own facility for testing. It really depends on the size. But a really good means of obtaining consumer input is to have a place where consumers can come in for idea generation, concept, product evaluations. There's pros and cons to having people come into your site, which is beyond today's scope, but it's something to think about. And there's also companies that can manage a database of relevant consumers for you, or you can maintain your own database. And with social media, it's not difficult to find consumers, but it's most important to find the right consumers. So you need the right facility commensurate with the scale of research, and it would be great if you could get consumers on site. Training. All right, I can't speak enough about training, and it needs to be internal and external, as well as continuous learning. So the sensory and consumer science staff should be training project teams in 2 areas internally: drivers of liking of the relevant category or product, and how to conduct and participate in team tastings. So you all know drivers of liking are the sensory properties that impact consumer acceptance positively or negatively. You may not know the drivers of liking for a given category or product from direct research, but there are some ways to triangulate the information to begin to form hypotheses. Then you've got team screenings, and they're a fact of life, and it's critical to conduct them as bias-free as possible. The sensory scientists can teach others how to conduct these and to be a good participant. And they can also teach the staff how to conduct them if there's no sensory scientists on staff. Maybe you're a smaller company. In ingredient and flavor companies, the sensory and consumer scientists should train the sales force in how to describe the sensory properties of the ingredients and flavors to your customers, and particularly as they interact with other ingredients in the finished product. And you also need external training, right? The staff needs to keep up with new developments. The field of sensory is new, and there's research at universities, and new methods are always being developed. And there's also ongoing research about the senses and consumer psychology. So it's critical that the staff be up to date on new developments and to have the opportunity to try new research methods as appropriate. Again, suppliers are really eager to work with companies and do this, and great partnerships can be formed. So you've got technical reading. Your staff should be reading technical. We had kind of book clubs at Kraft for technical reading where people would vary what they read and share it with their teams. You ought to be going to conferences where it's possible, bringing suppliers on site and other experts. They're often very willing to do this. And I can't state enough how important it is to serve in professional organizations. It increases the kind of the respect that your organization can get. People understand that you then support the profession, And also your staff can learn and deploy these new knowledge with the rest of the staff. So relationships. So the most important thing is relationships. The world revolves around relationships. This is last. I believe it's the most important. As we all know, as sensory scientists, sometimes we're not given props. We're not given respect right off the bat. You know, we've got to earn it. Other functions may not understand the role of the sensory consumer scientist, how it differs from consumer insights or marketing research. Consumer insights may feel that the sensory folks are infringing on their territory because both functions may conduct product research. I gave a talk on this, I don't know, 5-10 years ago at the IFT. If you're interested more, I can send it to you. But sensory scientists also are sometimes viewed as uncompromising. They may be seen as unflexible, and they may be inflexible. Or the sensory scientists may have difficulty translating research results into language that can be understood by all stakeholders. So it's critical to determine the optimal way to communicate with project teams and to determine what's your style, adapt your style appropriately, because the best relationships are collaborative, win-win. And you're going to have to change your style. We just heard an excellent talk on this at SSP. You're going to have to change your style based on your audience, right? Sometimes the sensory scientists may default to working with those teams that are easiest to work with or that request the most help rather than the teams that are working on projects that are most important to the organization. And it's up to the consumer scientist, to make sure that he or she is up to date with the organization's priorities so that they can deploy resources appropriately and effectively. So I'll tell you a little story. So at Kraft, we had Kraft, and we had Kraft North America, and then we had Kraft Canada. Kraft Canada was very small. I love my Canadian friends, but not very many people live in Canada compared to the United States. It was a very small business unit, and it accounted for a very small percentage of Kraft revenue and profit. We also had the Kraft Food Service division, again, compared to retail, very small. So one of my employees came to me and said that he was stressed because he had too much work. So I asked him to bring me his projects in detail so that I could look through them. And he was spending a significant amount of time not on Canada, not on food service, but on Canada food service in Canada, which really accounted for, practically no revenue. But the Canadian people were very nice. We all know that Canadians are nice. They loved him because he was giving them resources. They really were so appreciative of anything they can get. And so it was kind of stroking his ego. We all like to be appreciated as opposed to the person who kind of disses us. And he was giving Canada Food Service a lot more resources than it should have had. So I told him to stop working on Canada Food Service. He didn't stop working on Canada Food Service. But he sort of went underground and didn't complain about it anymore. So in ingredient and flavor companies, it's really important for the sensory and consumer science team to have good relationships with the sales force. They need to train them in the sensory properties of the ingredients they sell, how they differ from competitors, and in how to talk with them with customers, right? In ingredient companies, it's really all about sales. It's all about direct to customers. Often the sensory scientist companies the sales force on customer visits. When you show customers the strength of your function, it can demonstrate a competitive advantage compared to others. So now I'd like to switch gears for a minute and talk about the 5 stages of sensory consumer science function. And this has been adapted from a food technology article from, if you can believe, 1980. So there's roughly 5 levels of sophistication, and business size and needs are going to dictate the degree of sophistication that each organization needs. Now, there is a level 0, which is no sensory function at all. And I'm going to talk about how to fill that gap in a few minutes. But first, let's talk about the 5 levels. So there's level 1, where you have a technician. And the technician executes methods, and usually it's a small toolbox. Someone says, I need you to do this test for me. And it's really just a testing service. Then we have level 2, which I've called Technician Plus. The Technician Plus may choose a method. They may have a small toolbox, and they may choose a method when confronted with a problem. Level 3 is the Scientist, and again, they choose methods. They may have a wider toolbox than Level 2. Level 4 is an Expert, and Level 4 has a wide range of methods that they would deploy. And Level 5, the leader, a leader in the sensory function, or a function that is known for their leadership, are actually developing methods as opposed to just choosing methods they have. It's not always necessary to develop method, but you might. So in terms of facility, a technician would have a rolling cart running around, begging people to please taste some products or dropping them off at their desk. At the Technician Plus level, there may be a facility level 2. Levels 3, 4, and 5 of sensory scientist, expert, and leader, generally they have facilities. In terms of project knowledge, technician has no project knowledge. He or she is just asked to execute a test. In terms of level 2, the executor may have limited project knowledge. A level 3 organization, the sensory folks are going to have substantial product knowledge. And in level 4 and 5, the expert and leader are going to have complete project knowledge. In terms of training, and when I talk about training, I'm talking about on-the-job training, but I'm also really talking about academic training, either through a program, bachelor's or master's in sensory science, psychology, or completing the Davis or other university certification programs. Level 2 may have some training. Level 3, they're generally well trained. And at levels 4 and 5, you're talking about sensory experts. What do those at level 1 and level 2 do? They answer specific questions. So is A different from B would be an example. I need you to test A versus B to see if they're different. Level 3 would answer broader questions, such as what attributes of these products would define A versus B? Level 4 responds to issues. For example, how do we find out how consumers really use product A? And level 5, my favorite, they define the issues. So what should the entire research plan for a new macaroni and cheese product look like? They are actually defining, people come to them with problems, and they actually help to define the issues or define what questions need to be asked. The general technician levels, levels 1 and 2, they're not on the project team. Level 3 is a member of the project team. Level 4 is a respective member of the project team. And level 5 would be a critical member of the project team, where if the person is not available, they would say, wait, we can't have this meeting without Joe or Jane. All right. So in applying what I've discussed so far, there's 4 questions to ask yourself pertaining to your sensory and consumer science, if you have one. So these are the 4 questions. So can I point to any instances where my sensory consumer science team has changed the direction of a key project? So when could that happen? Well, what if one of your products was lagging behind the competition in sales and you decided to improve the product? But what if the research showed the product was indeed superior to competition, right? Then the company would have to switch gears and think about other factors contributing to sales besides the sensory profile of the product. People are always wanting to blame the sensory profile of the product, you know, been there, done that. And maybe it's not the sensory product. Now, what if you want to change a supplier, but not change the sensory profile of the product? We've all been there. But what if the new supplier's ingredient makes a perceptible change in the product? Now you have to decide how to proceed. And if you have a new product, the sensory science could recommend a research path that you'd not considered. Maybe we're looking into emotions or understanding sensory cues that signal the product's job is being done well. So ask yourself, where did my team change the direction of a key project? Next question. In how many projects has the sensory consumer science team defined the research issues? Remember I talked about level 5, defining the research issues. Sophisticated sensory and consumer scientists define the issues, And they do that working hand in hand with R&D, marketing, and consumer insights, rather than just responding to requests for testing. Ask yourself, how often does your sensory consumer science team speak in the language of risk reduction, right? This is language you should speak. This path is riskier than this path. And here's the degree of risk associated with given action. Your team should be able to take a statistical finding and decode it so everyone understands the risks of decisions based on the research. And they should also be able to reduce risk using plain old good judgment based on their category, product, and consumer knowledge. The last question to ask yourself, what is your sensory consumer science function taught you and your company about your products, competitors' products, or consumers that you didn't already know and to which you refer regularly? So the sensory team should be periodically updating the product and category teams about the state of knowledge of the product and category. They should be integrating learnings across the research that's done to develop a knowledge base for relevant products and categories, and they should be deploying that throughout the organization. As I mentioned previously, the sensory team can help the sales force differentiate their ingredients from competitors, but they can also go a lot deeper. So for example, they can conduct a category study of relevant ingredient or flavor categories to determine the drivers of liking, or learn how flavor types within a category are delivered to the marketplace. So for example, the team could discover and teach how the world of strawberry flavor plays out in the marketplace, or they could be involved in category trend analysis. So let's talk about how to leverage some of the sensory consumer science tools if you don't have a sensory function. So if you don't have an in-house sensory consumer science function, you absolutely need to know how to conduct and participate in team tastings without bias. The bias comes from two areas: knowing about the product or project, which means you're going to be tasting with your mind more than with your senses, and bias from deferring your opinion to others due to their rank or position in the organization or the fact that they have project or product knowledge. And there are specific techniques that can be used during these evaluations to reduce or eliminate these types of biases. ASTM publishes technical documents that provide specific methods for many of these sensory and consumer science techniques. Now, if you're not familiar with ASTM or you want to know more about it, just contact me offline. You've got to at least train your organization in effective team tastings if there's no sensory consumer science. You also need, even if there's no function, you need efficient access to relevant consumers. As I mentioned, this is necessary to understand whether new products are delivering versus expectations, to uncover drivers of liking. And when I say relevant consumers, I mean those consumers whose opinions you should care about. This is rarely your organization's employees, right? Employees, they're a readily available group to evaluate products, but they're not often the target group. And I've had people say to me, well, my employees use my products. Well, that's great. What I would say to that is that's great, but they're biased. And they're biased because they're working in your organization. They also don't know that they're biased. They don't know what their biases are, and neither do you. So I would suggest that working with certain universities to conduct consumer research, you can get a low-cost way. It's not no cost, but you can access target consumers, and I have worked with universities successfully at doing this. You can also recruit consumers on your own. You can use Facebook or social media tools. Some of my supplier friends are now gasping. But you know, the important thing with these, you've got to make sure that the consumers being surveyed are relevant to the issues at hand and try and make sure that they're not lying. I have been involved in research where consumers were recruited using social media, and I was surprised and impressed with the quality of the information gained from this kind of research. If there's no sensory function, you also need efficient access to technical panels. So you can answer questions like, are these two products detectively different? Or what are the differences between these two products? And again, specific universities have panels on site that can answer these questions. Some of them do it better than others. It's good to know which are best for the type of research you're considering. So the goals for today was to get you to ponder those questions. Is your team maximizing its contribution and decreasing risk and contributing to business growth? What your team needs to maximize its potential? And how can you leverage the sensory consumer science tools in decreasing risk if you don't have this function? And I hope I've given you some food for thought in thinking about whether your team is maximizing its potential, showing you what tools they need, and showing you how to leverage some of the tools if you don't have the function. I just also want to add briefly that I've developed an auditing process and tools that I use to gauge the health and efficacy of sensory and consumer science functions. So please contact me via LinkedIn or Lori Rothman Consulting at Gmail if you're interested in my audit function. And I want to thank Perry so much for organizing the webinar again. And I think we do have time for a few questions. Perry?
Yes, we do have time for questions. So thank you very much. I think I mentioned everyone earlier in the webinar that we met in sort of networking and love of our former employer or employment sort of scenarios, and today was really a great opportunity for me to learn a lot more about what you do and how it's done. So I've taken a few notes. So thank you very much for being here and sharing with us. So there are a couple of questions. And so I think you were just answering, I think, one of them, which is, are there methodologies you use for quantifying risk? And you're talking alpha, beta risk associated with particular studies. So this goes into
Yes.
sort of risk reduction, and how do you do that, right?
Yeah. So there's the quantitative side to risk and the qualitative. The quantitative is alpha, beta. But, and I would say that when you use beta, you have to define what level of risk you're willing to take. And you have to define that broadly with the organization. What is a good thing to do is to tier your portfolio of products into what you would call crown jewels. These are ones where we're willing to take very, very little risk. Medium ones that are of moderate impact to the company. And when I say impact, I'm talking about revenue and margin. Although with new products, you may want to take very little risk with them because they're strategic, even though they have not yet garnered significant revenue or margin. So there's the crown jewels, there's the medium, and then there's the ones that we don't care about so much, like, sorry guys, Canada Food Service. Ones where, maybe they're flankers, maybe they're just there to hold on to shelf space while we do some other products. And so it's really important to actually sit down with the cross-functional team and define your risk in terms of alpha and beta for the various kinds of projects that you're working on. Also, qualitatively, based on what you know from working with consumers, how they use your products, where their hopes and dreams lie, consumer empathy, it will help you with risk. So, for example, let's say you have a chocolate pudding cup, and you include with it a paper spoon, and you know that, this is going to sound stereotype, but busy moms, give this to your kids while they're taking them back and forth between sports events, right? You know that they eat your product with this, it comes with the spoon in the back of the car on their way between A and B, school and soccer, whatever it is. And now the company wants to reduce costs by getting rid of the spoon. Well, you already know now that this is going to be a risky proposition. Maybe you have to test it to define it, but you also could say, wow, based on what we already know about how consumers use our product, and it's, if we take this spoon away, it might not be fit for its purpose. The next question, Perry.
Yes. The next question, what are the emerging technologies, innovation in the sensory consumer science space?
Wow, I would say that I'm not sure what you mean by technologies. There are a whole host of, methods that have been what we call in the news lately. There's certainly kata, there's emotions, um, there's all sorts of things going on, probably beyond the scope of this call. I would say if you're really interested, contact me offline. We can chat, or start going to some of the meetings and professional organizations to find that out.
All right. And I think that, yeah, so one other question, I think maybe you answered this around using social media, but how do you source consumer panelists?
Right. Well, there's ways that you can create panels using social media. There's forums. I had a client that kind of, infiltrated various forums that existed. There's a whole art and science to that, which is probably longer than this webinar, but it can be done, and I have seen it be done surprisingly successfully.
Great. Okay, and one last question. Someone asked about sharing the presentation.
Okay. How will that be done, Perry? Or
If you will send it to me, I can get it through out to everyone I know who's registered.
Okay.
And I have one more question that just came in.
Yes.
Can we do descriptive testing without replications?
Well, I would say no, because I wouldn't do it without replication, because you need to know how good your tool is and how much noise is. And I don't know that you can do, I wouldn't do the analysis of variance without replications. So good question. You need at least 2 reps. It'd be great if you could do 3. Sometimes with very huge studies where there's like 30 products, replication is not done. I would say that the bigger the differences are across the products, the less replication you need. The more the products are similar, the more reps you're going to need to be able to tease out those differences.
All right. Any more questions? Just send them in the chat area. Okay, so here's one. Recent FQP article says you can do any one. I may do only one. Answer if it depends on training, product size of difference, or only one. Maybe.
Yeah, I think I just addressed that. So again, if you've got a huge study, a lot of products, or products that are very, very different, you may be able to get away with one. And if their products are very similar, you're probably going to need all reps, more reps. But I would also say that, there are times when, and you can throw tomatoes at me, but there are times when differences are so obvious you don't need a panel. I mean, I've had people come to me with an orange and an apple. I mean, I'm saying this figuratively, and say, we need to find out if these are different colors. And I would say that if it's super obvious, and I know you can all argue with me about what is super obvious, but if something is really, really obvious, if you can see it clearly, if untrained people can tell, if you see it in a tasting, sometimes I would go and ask the admins, right? And usually the admins are great sources of information. And if you can see how it's different, don't waste your panel resources in doing that. Those have been all really good questions.
Yep.
I hope people have more.
Yes, so I don't see any more
Right.
at the moment, but I just want to, again, Lori, thank you very much for taking the time to pull together all of materials and share with us. For everyone on the webinar, we're going to do more of this, so please join the network. We're really trying to evolve this sort of professional development series, and we would love to have Lori back again to talk about another topic if she's willing to come back and do that. So want to thank everybody for being here today, and thank you so much, Lori.
And thank you, Perry. And as long as you're willing to do all the technical stuff, I'll happily participate.
Absolutely. I think I got the, so I'm sorry, I see one question. Can you join the network even if you do not? Yes, so we are now consumer product goods professional network. So anyone that's worked in any size or shape CPG type organization, even if you're a consultant to CPG organizations and support them in some way. The commonality is about the industry and CPG. So yes, you're welcome to join. Good question. Thanks everybody. We will see you again on another webinar or at one of our events coming up.